Thank you for watching Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Jaquetta Williams. You know, today's show is about bringing light into a dark place, and it's about helping people who need it. We're going to spend a little time in Atlanta, in Virginia Beach, and in Montgomery, Alabama. But first, our history books have a lot of information about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. They're both examples of why I'm able to come into your home right now. But Dr. King Jr. stood on the shoulders of his father, which is why it seems only right that at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King Sr. and Jr. preached, there's a complex named after Daddy King. It's a one-stop shop location for people who really need help. And the idea came from the man who is the senior pastor of that church right now. Then, since we're talking about Ebenezer, there's a member of the famous church who has name recognition and celebrity of her own. She's a music industry veteran who has worked with people like Prince, TLC, BBD, and countless more celebrities. But none of them really knew about the personal battles she fought. You will meet Shanti Das, who started an initiative called Silence the Shame. Then we'll leave Atlanta and scoot on over to Norfolk, Virginia, to learn more about the Clergy Patrol and how some pastors there are doing ride-alongs on Friday and Saturday nights with police officers to build trust and respect between the community, clergy, and law enforcement. They're putting Ephesians 6:10-11 to practice, where it says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. We'll take you from the Clergy Patrol to Crime Stoppers in Montgomery, Alabama, where they're putting Proverbs 21:3 to work, where it says, to do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. We've got a good show for you. Let's start with our first story right here in Atlanta, shall we? Did you know there have been only 5 senior pastors at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. brought it to international stature, and Dr. Raphael Warnock has continued the legacy. He's been senior pastor since 2005, when he was 35 years old. I stopped by the church to have a talk with him. Right now, I want to invite you to listen in on our conversation.
Yeah, it's the Martin Luther King Senior Community Resources Complex. It's named after Dr. King's father, who was the 3rd pastor of this church. We've only had 5 since 1886.
You make 5?
I'm number 5.
Okay.
But Daddy King really doesn't get his due. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, is one of the most well-known activists of all times. But his father, a local pastor, was a social gospel activist in his own right. He was fighting for voting rights in 1935.
Wow.
30 years before the Voting Rights Act was passed, Martin Luther King Sr. was leading a voting rights campaign right here in Atlanta. So when we see Martin Luther King Jr. stand up and fight for voting rights, he's really standing on the shoulders of his father and his grandfather. So that's the tradition we've tried to continue here at Ebenezer, this work of fighting for voting rights, dealing with poverty, helping the most marginalized members of the human family. And so in 2012, we built the Martin Luther King Senior Community Resources Complex. It houses several nonprofit partners who are focused in helping people get into the world of work through job placement and job readiness, financial literacy, credit repair. We're focused on bridging the digital divide between poor communities and affluent communities. So there's a cyber cafe where people who don't have access to laptops and computers can come to the church, fill out a job resume, and get ready for the world of work.
What made you even want to decide to house it, do something like this, and particularly at a church?
I believe that that's what the gospel is about. When I think about Jesus, I think about a young preacher, rabbi, standing up in the temple and reading from the book of Isaiah in his very first public sermon. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to open the eyes of the blind, to set the captives free, to preach the year of the Lord's favor, which I think is a reference to the Jubilee. So this complex is about giving people another chance, giving people a chance to be their best self. Sometimes we say in America, you know, that people ought to take personal responsibility. They ought to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Well, some people don't have boots. So this complex was built to help people to get some boots so that they can move towards self-sufficiency. I believe that this is how the Lord works. When you are sincere and committed to the work and you start marching, it comes together as you do the work. So yeah, we had a rough vision of what we wanted to do, this idea of creating a big tent where you would invite partners who have expertise in job placement and job readiness, expertise in financial literacy, expertise with working with families where children are struggling. I've always been inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. Early on as a child, his sermons, his activism, his willingness to risk even his life for what he saw as the cause of the gospel inspired me as the child myself of a pastor. But I think it's a mistake for anybody to try to mimic it. You know, people ask me all the time, what is it like to walk in Dr. King's shoes? Well, I'm very clear that it's not my job to walk in anybody's shoes.
You can't serve God and money.
I think we're put here to be our best self. So I would much rather stand on his shoulders than try to walk in his shoes. We have incredible human stories that come out of that center, and it's the thing that makes ministry so wonderful. And we announced to the community that you could come to Ebenezer and get a free haircut. So I think sometimes we're standing in our pulpits hoping people will come into the sanctuary, and when we really need to take it to the streets. But there was a young man who came, and I'll never forget, he said, "Reverend, I want to thank you for doing this." And I'm thinking, it's just a simple haircut.
I'm telling the truth about it.
He said, well, I have a job interview next week, and I know that people look at your appearance, and so I needed the haircut really to go and do the job interview. But I really can't afford the haircut because I don't have a job. And I think this is the kind of thing the church has the moral authority to do. We convened the different sectors of our county government and law enforcement and the DA and the prosecutors. And we asked them to create a one-stop shop at the church in which people who have arrest records had their arrest records expunged in one day. Can you imagine the second chance that gives to somebody who's applied for an apartment? They can't get an apartment because they ask you on the application, not have you ever been convicted, have you ever been arrested? We expunged hundreds of arrest records here in Fulton County. And so the second chance, the stories of second chances, you can replicate over and over again. And that's just one example of the great work that we get a chance to do.
How does that make you feel?
Well, it's very fulfilling. I think, you know, Dr. King said that the day we stop speaking on the things that matter, we begin to die. I think it's possible to breathe and not be alive. And so I do this work because it helps me come alive.
And thank you to the Reverend Dr. Warnock and his staff over at Ebenezer for allowing us to come in and spend a little time. Reverend Warnock says he wants the programs at his church to continue to grow. As a matter of fact, they plan to build the Boys and Girls Club right there at the church. It will be on the campus of Ebenezer, next to the historic sanctuary where Dr. King and his father worked every day. To find out more about Ebenezer Baptist Church or the Community Resources Complex, both websites and phone numbers are listed right there below. Now, it is hard not having a relationship with your father. It is the first introduction a girl has with a man who loves her. But for Shanti Das, that opportunity never happened. Her father killed himself when she was just a baby. This is Shanti when she was a baby girl. She's a pretty baby girl, right? But what her father did had haunting effects on her life, despite all of her many accomplishments. Shanti came by our studio here in Atlanta, and we had a serious conversation about mental health. We're talking to Shanti Das. You know, she's been in the music business, she's been an executive for more than 2 decades, and I'm talking about she's worked with some heavy hitters. But we're talking about something that's really, really important to her. It's something called Silence the Shame. You want to find out what it is? Let's get into it. Welcome, Shanti Das. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It's so great to see you.
You too, Shanti. First of all, let's talk about what is Silence the Shame?
Silence the Shame is an initiative that I started really 2 years ago, but we just officially launched this year because you know how that goes. Something that was so personal for me. My father committed suicide when I was 7 months old. And in the last 3 years, my best friend committed suicide. I have a family member that's bipolar, and 2 years ago, I had my own suicidal ideation. It was something that was always in the back of my head, that I was afraid that since my dad did it, that it was something that would happen to me. And so I decided to start the movement Silence the Shame to peel back the layers of shame and stigma around mental health so that we can normalize the conversation and finally be okay with talking about it. I know that I've suffered from depression over the years and never really sought counseling or treatment. I did go to therapy in my 30s, but I've been an entrepreneur now for almost 8 years and doing a lot of work in the community and just the ups and downs of life. I had some health issues. My mother has Alzheimer's now. And I never properly dealt with that depression from my dad committing suicide. I wanted a father all of my life. And, depression is, it's easy to say, you have cancer or heart disease. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's wrong when you have mental health problems. But I knew something wasn't right. I didn't want to get out of bed. I wasn't talking to friends as much. I didn't want to go out and socialize. And I just talked myself into a downward spiral in 2015, and I considered taking pills. So it's interesting that I would be doing an interview on TBN because I'm at a point in my life where I kind of let the Holy Spirit lead and guide everything in my life. And I'm a member of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church with Dr. Raphael Warnock. He's also a mentor. And I text Dr. Warnock and I told him what I was going through. And this was, I thought, really amazing. He said to me, "I'll pray with you, but I can't pray you through it. I need you to go see a doctor this time." So I did just that. I saw a psychiatrist and started on antidepressants. And that was kind of what started me, on this new path of recovery. And I wanted to be able to share my story, but it's been freeing for me to be able to talk about it. And all of the events that we've been doing with Silence the Shame, it's just amazing seeing how many people want to talk and are afraid to share and talk about it.
Why do you think people are so afraid to share?
Well, I think, first of all, no one wants to be labeled, right? We never want to think anything is wrong with us. And particularly in the African American community, shame and stigma has been there for so long. We just kind of ostracize those folks from society or even within our families. Or, I've talked to families that have family members that have committed suicide, and it's been very hush-hush and secret. No one wants to talk about it. Well, that's what we're doing now with Silence the Shame, is starting the conversation.
With you being in the music business and representing and working with so many well-known artists, I'm sure what you were going through, depression or just having those bouts, aren't really things that you can really talk about.
No, not at all. And don't get me wrong, it hasn't always been this easy. I was very afraid to share. Again, having worked with the likes of Outkast and TLC, and even got to work with Prince, may he rest in peace. I was wondering what my peers would think, and just people that have been along my career path. But I just got to a point where I had to live my best life and be honest with myself. Working in a high-pressured entertainment industry, and I'm sure you understand working in just television and film and music, no one wants to share any secrets or think someone's going to talk.
It's a sign of weakness.
Exactly, right? And especially if you're at the executive level, I didn't want to be considered weak. There have been several of my peers over the last decade that worked in entertainment that have committed suicide. And same thing, people came out and supported around the funeral, but no one really talked about it. The who, what, when, and why. Why did this happen? What can we do to prevent it? You don't even really see it within, our companies where the HR departments talk about the importance of self-care. I want to be able to, start clinics, to help people have access to mental health care professionals. So you can see a therapist or you can see a psychologist or psychiatrist. I want to be able to supplement and help the underserved, those that can't help themselves. But I want to be able to have a unique position and utilize my influence in the entertainment community to really get everybody else to see it's okay to talk. Like it or not, our kids and even adults are influenced by members of the entertainment community as well as athletes. And so we often, do what they say, hopefully if it's in a positive light. And so it was just really overwhelming, the support that we received. I came up with an idea to do a global Silence the Shame Day when we launched on May 5th. And to see that Ludacris and Keisha Knight Pulliam and Russell Simmons and all those folks posted was really overwhelming and emotional, but it showed the power, one, of social media, the power of my Rolodex over the last 25 years to really do something positive and good for our community. And I think it's only going to continue to grow. We just received our new PSAs from T-Boz, from TLC, Brandon Marshall, who is an NFL player, who also suffers from borderline personality disorder. And we're starting a campus ambassador program, so we'll have college reps across the country. And we also have a podcast on iTunes. So we interview therapists and different people sharing their stories. And it's interesting because I'm trying to market Silence the Shame like a music project and utilize some of the same, tried and true ways of promotion to really put this in the forefront of pop culture.
We understand this is something that's never going to go away, but you've learned how to manage it.
Absolutely.
So for somebody who is seeing themselves somewhat in you as they're watching this interview, what are some of the tools that you're using when you feel that feeling coming up?
Self-care. Making sure that even when I wake up in the morning that I open those blinds immediately, because vitamin D helps our mood. So I need to let that sunlight in. Meditation is great. Yoga is great. And then also seeing a therapist if need be. I weaned myself off of my antidepressants once I started feeling better. And you're definitely not supposed to do it abruptly. So consult your licensed healthcare professional, if you're on medication. But the main thing is knowing those trigger points, because even talking about what I've gone through and my personal testimony has kind of weighed down on me emotionally. So I want to make sure that there's someone I can talk to objectively to help me through this.
Shanti Das, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you,
And don't forget, silencetheshame.com.
The Clergy Patrol is where pastors in the city of Norfolk are partnering with the Norfolk Police Department and doing ride-alongs on Friday and Saturday nights. I am Dr. Antipas Harris. I'm the founder and dean of the Urban Renewal Center, which is a partnership with the First Presbyterian Church of Norfolk.
Norfolk is a very vibrant city, a very diverse city, a lot going on, particularly downtown. Downtown is thriving, particularly on the weekends. We have the world's largest naval base, which is significant. We have a very good working relationship with our military personnel. I am Larry Boone. I happen to be the chief of police here in the city of Norfolk. I was thinking when I became chief, what could I do to bridge the gap? The idea behind this is, particularly in Norfolk, we have some communities where there's an issue with trust with the police, but in most of our fragile communities, particularly the African American communities, there's never been an issue with clergy. So what better way to close that gap than police and clergy?
So this idea of connecting with the community spirituality in moments of challenge, I think is very key, and it's an opportunity for the church to reconnect with the spirituality that's outside of the church. When this chief took the role of chief, he thought it'd be a great idea to start in a proactive way, building those relationships. In his words, pastors have a lot of power. So of course you can see that. We have a lot of influence in our congregation, and oftentimes when there are situations in the community, whether the shootings or gang violence or some casualties, if we call a prayer meeting or a meeting, we tend to get a lot of people to show up.
I wanted them to have an opportunity to see up close and personal what it's like from our lens, the police officer's lens, to deal with the community.
My experience has been extraordinary. We've had opportunities to build relationship with the police, which is, I think, a valuable partnership, but also as we encounter situations, whether they are domestic disputes or stabbings or shootings or standoffs, we're right there. And many times we're able to offer services to mediate conflict or to de-escalate situations, which of course in these days and time when there's so much faction between the police and the community, particularly in inner cities, our work, I think, has proven to be valuable, and the citizens always respond very positively.
Community engagement is very important with Norfolk Police, and here's why. If you look back 3 or 4 years ago across the country, the national optic was Ferguson, New York City, Baltimore, some of the things that were occurring across the country. We were ahead of that, okay, because we knew it was important. In order for us to be effective, we have to build authentic relationships. And I'm not talking about the political correctness type of officer friendly. I'm talking about relationships that touch your heart, your soul, and your spirit.
Just recently, this weekend, I was out there and a mother called the police on her 17-year-old son. And when I got there, there were several police there. And there was a little bit of defensiveness and not feeling as if they were going to be protected. And I walked up to the young man and I said, I'm a pastor working with the police. I want to make sure that you are protected and that they are protected. And so we want to make sure we understand what's going on here and see if we can settle the situation the best way we can. And it was this sense of, oh, I appreciate it. And in fact, he said that, oh, I appreciate it. I think the community calls upon the pastors because that's the way God intends it. God intends for pastors not only to be inward looking, but also outward looking. And so particularly in the inner cities, there are churches everywhere. And there's been a lot of concern as to where the church stands in light of a lot of social issues. And so the Clergy Patrol allows us the opportunity to be fully present and bear witness in the public square. The benefit is that the church is then seen as a church that's not only looking inwardly, but looking outwardly. It's a profound opportunity to bear witness in all types of situations and also to build a rapport with the police department.
The feedback that I've received, particularly from the clergy, they had no idea what police people go through. They had no idea until you actually sat in that car and listened to the radio, go to the scene, see some of the victims, see some of the citizens that may be in a crisis. You know, it's refreshing to them. It gives them an opportunity to do some heavy lifting that they didn't know exist. And for us, we are thankful that they are extending their time outside of their normal work schedule so they can get a full appreciation of what we do. So it's been a win-win for everybody, the citizens of Norfolk, the police department, or certainly the Clergy Patrol.
We particularly need more pastors to get involved. One, because of leadership. Our community needs leadership that's visible in the community, not simply in the church. Two, I think that because pastors have a presence and it calms the situation for a pastor to be present.
At the end of the day, the program was built to influence and make better partnerships and relationships with the citizens of Norfolk.
Thank you, Chief Boone and Dr. Harris. Hey, did you know, according to a recent study by the Pew Research Center, only a third of people say they have confidence in their police department? But it looks like the relationship between the Norfolk Police Department and the Clergy Patrol is doing something to change that. And let's take a look at what they're doing in Montgomery, Alabama to fight against crime when the criminal is a child with a gun. TBN's Felicia Taylor sat down with District Attorney Daryl Bailey and the Executive Director of Crime Stoppers, Tony Garrett. Take a look.
We're noticing that the crimes that are being committed, our violent crimes, are being committed by young people. And a lot of our victims, unfortunately, are young people. So we as community leaders got together about a month ago to address this, and we came up with what I believe is a pretty good initiative to help with this problem.
And when you talk about that initiative on a grassroots level especially, how are you working to implement this particular initiative?
The initiative is pretty simple. If you know of a juvenile in Montgomery County that has an illegal weapon, and if they're a juvenile, it's probably going to be illegal for them to have it, then you call Crime Stoppers, 215-STOP, and if the police department or sheriff's office or a law enforcement officer confiscates that weapon from that juvenile, or from their residence or wherever that they might have possession of it, then you will get a reward of $300.
How important are faith-based organizations when you take on such initiatives?
It's very important. Crime Stoppers has many partners, and when we get calls in, sometimes it may be above our head, or we may have to reach out to one of our partners, and many times it's a minister or a counselor that's serving at a church. So we call that church or we call that minister and we ask them, can you intercede on our behalf as far as this person needs more advice or more counseling on your end. So the faith base is very important in our program.
Our faith leaders are a very important part of this process. They're helping us get the word out through their youth groups, through their congregations, and we also rely on our religious leaders, our church leaders, to help us when we have a crime that has taken place. The Montgomery Police Department has a wonderful program using our religious leaders when they come out to a crime scene or help with counseling or those type of things.
And the church is one of the first resources that I use. I ask them, well, are you going to church? If you don't talk to the police, you don't talk to me, can you at least talk to your minister? Can you at least talk to someone at your church to maybe give you a little faith-based healing? So you'll be more adept to get some help that you need.
Prayer is key. Prayer is so important. So at the end of the day, the church should be giving hope to all those in the community that are in distress.
Yes, it's a big factor. It plays a big factor as far as in my job, as far as the community. When a person calls in, sometimes they're broken, and they need something to give them strength so they can go ahead and get that additional help that they need. And sometimes that pastor, that minister, or that person that's just going to church may give that person that extra added strength just to get the help that they need.
From a personal standpoint, what goals are you looking for to see in this initiative?
So my personal goal is to make our community free from violence and to protect our children.
Our young people, the numbers are just alarming right now.
Unbelievable. It's very alarming. As I said, when I started out as a prosecutor 20 years ago, the offenders that were committing the violent offenses were in their 20s, maybe 30s. Now we're seeing 14 and 15-year-olds committing most of the violent offenses in our community. The dangers of guns is obvious. They can kill people, and we have seen that over and over. And young people that are carrying guns, statistics show me that they're going to use them in a crime. So we as residents, we as community members, the best thing that you can do is if you know of a juvenile who has a gun, or if you see a juvenile carrying a gun, call Crime Stoppers and report it. You can also reach me on Facebook through my Facebook page or on Instagram. We have a lot of different ways that you can call and report this, and the important thing about it is you remain anonymous. You get the reward once the gun is confiscated, but your name is not used.
Our goal is to have parents, have guardians, have neighbors. If you know that it's an issue in your neighborhood, start doing something about it. If it's nothing but calling 215-STOP, that's enough. We can go ahead and get you some type of assistance in some form.
There are a number of other agencies and organizations that also are taking part in these initiatives. From the Montgomery and River region, I'm Felicia Taylor.
Thanks, Felicia. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more behind-the-scenes action of what we're doing, follow us on Instagram at JIOTATL and on Facebook, Joy in Our Town, Atlanta.